Better Buildings for Humans is powered by Advanced Glazings, makers of the Solera line of products. Solera is the leading glass glazing made specifically for architectural daylighting and with extreme insulation performance. Learn more at advancedglazings.com. Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of Better Buildings for Humans. This is the podcast where we take a look at how the built environment impacts our health, our wellness, our productivity, and our general joy of being alive. And also we talk about sustainable design as well. I'm your host, Joe Menchefski. And today we have two guests with us, and we have a very interesting show. We've got Price Latimer and Maya Crowne from Alkemis Paints. Welcome to the show, both of you. Welcome, Maya and Price.
Thank you, Joe. We're happy to be here.
Oh, it's great to have you guys. This is going to be fun. Let's kick off things by having both of you introduce yourselves, letting our listeners know a little bit about you, and then talk about the road that led both of you guys to developing Alkemis. Let's start with Price.
I'm Price Latimer. I am the Chief Creative Officer and co-founder of Alkemis Paint. And I've been an artist and designer my whole life. I went to art school. I went to the Rhode Island School of Design. I've also attended Parsons School of Design. My degree is in graphic design, and I have worked across the board as a multidisciplinary artist and designer in the furniture world, the art world, hospitality, interior design as well. And that all led me to Maya bringing me on in 2020 to become a co-founder of this incredible brand. And I always like to say Alkemis ticks all of the boxes of, things that I'm passionate about, things that I care about. So really bringing art, design, environmentalism, creative problem solving together to create a better, architectural coating that can really change the world and shift our, dependence away from petrochemicals and plastics.
Well, we're going to learn a lot more about that and how you're going to do that in just a little while. Maya, how about your background and your road to Alkemis?
Sure. So I'm Maya Crowne. I am the CEO and co-founder of Alkemis Paint. My background, coincidentally, is not in design at all. It's been more in finance, business, startups, strategic partnerships, but I've been a conscious consumer my entire life, always a naturopath. I grew up eating really healthy. My mom was a decorative painter. My dad was a professional athlete. So when I was younger, never had, the junky snacks that everybody else did. And, as a function of that really translated into a lot of different areas of my life. And I am a big lover and advocate of art and design. And that's really how Price and I bonded in 2020 as friends. And I was taking classes at the New York Academy of Art. I found myself being really interested in materials whenever I was looking at art, collecting art. And during the pandemic, the school shut down, so I wasn't able to go to classes anymore. And I was interested in a creative project inside of my apartment. I live in New York City, and I wanted to repaint my 450 square foot alcove studio. So I went to Home Depot and went to the paint section and started smelling that familiar paint fume and very quickly realized that there's no way that I can paint my apartment right now. I can't leave. No one can breathe. Nobody, my neighbors are going to get frustrated with me if I paint my apartment. They don't want to be leaving their spaces. And why is it that paint smells so bad? So I went down this rabbit hole to very quickly come to discover that the paint that we use in the United States is acrylic or latex-based paint. And globally, 95% of the time, that's the paint that we're using in our enclosed spaces. By definition, acrylic and latex paints are plastic, and we have been painting our spaces long before the advent of plastic. So I really started to look for an alternative, given the fact that the idea of covering myself with plastic, now that I was aware of that, just didn't meet my values as a conscious consumer. And, as Price mentioned, her background is in interior design, graphic design, branding. I really wanted to make sure that what we brought to the market met both of our aesthetic requirements, which I would like to say is quite high. We didn't want people to feel like they were sacrificing on performance or quality by utilizing something that was better for the environment, because for whatever reason, there seems to be this idea that if you're using something eco, it's not high design, or, these things need to be mutually exclusive. Whereas when we think about food, organic food, when we think about clean skincare, when we think about fashion, like these different areas are really overlapping. And, from an organic food perspective, I would argue that they're mainstream now. Like nobody expects that, if you're eating organic, that means that it's, crunchy granola or tree hugger-ish. Like these things are just, the standard. And I really believe that design is moving in this direction as well. So that's how Alkemis Paint, the world's first wellness paint, was really started. And we're really here to change the narrative around what is healthy building, what is healthy design, and how to think about your interior space as being an extension of your overall wellness.
Yeah, I love that. Okay, it's funny. If I go back 15, 20 years, there was an assumption that if something was green, that there was a reduced performance. It was just a given, an assumption that if we're going to use something green, there's going to be a compromise somewhere. Not the case anymore, clearly, but my goodness, it was definitely, a prevailing attitude for a very long time. It's not the case anymore. Let's talk about this thing that you guys have created, this company. You just mentioned the term world's first wellness paint. Let's start by defining wellness paint. What is a wellness paint?
Well, our mission statement, I'll just start off with, is that, we believe that we can raise the vibration of our home planet by starting with our most intimate space, which is our four walls. And so this idea of really being the change that we want to see in the world and, starting small with these decisions that are very conscientious that then percolate out into the world. And I think that we'll all agree that there's been a lack of conversation around healthy building materials, in kind of the general discussion as far as overall holistic wellness. And this is, again, something that we want to shift and change people's perspectives on, because like Maya said, everyone's thinking about organic food. What are you putting into your body? What kind of, skincare are you using? What type of cleaning products are you utilizing in your home? And there's just been this lack of conversation around the, entire building, materials of the structures that we're living in. And we spend 90% of our time indoors. So the impact that these materials and chemicals have on our well-being is obviously, there's a huge correlation, but I just think that, there's been a lack of discussion. And we have had so many conversations with, very well-versed, very educated, very successful architects, designers, contractors. And as soon as you tell them, 95% of the paint used globally is plastic-based, petrochemical-based, people are like, wait, what? So many, and I can attest to this. Again, I've spent my entire life in the art and design sector, and I thought I knew about paint, and I know a lot about it, but I didn't make that connection because we've all been told, well, if it's low VOC, it's healthier, but what does that mean? What are these actual ingredients? And, companies aren't required, the EPA doesn't require disclosure on the actual labels. So there can be all types of carcinogens, plasticizers, fungicides, pesticides, biocides, just a litany of things that are really harmful for humans and the environment. And the average consumer doesn't know about that. You have to ask for a safety data sheet, which is typically, buried deep in somebody's website or, literature. And all of this was really eye-opening to us. And it's just something you can't unsee. So we really like to, define ourselves as the world's first wellness paint because we're thinking of this product as something much bigger than just an architectural coating on your wall, because it actually is shifting the conversation about, the entirety of what we're building our homes and, both residential and commercial spaces out of.
And quite literally, just to add on to what Price was saying, we define ourselves as a wellness paint because of the ingredients used in the paint. We have a proprietary mineral based formula. So, there it's fundamentally different than the standard acrylic latex based paints. These are materials that come from the earth. They apply like normal paints, they're easy to use, and they're so much more durable and arguably more beautiful in some ways than your standard petrochemical based paint. And on top of that, we use only 10 natural pigments that have been used since the dawn of time. We have a proprietary clear crystal quartz binder. We all know that certain minerals and rocks have Eastern therapeutic benefits as it relates to, raising the vibration inside of your home, activating your space. And furthermore, on a very practical level, our paint is cradle to cradle certified, which we consider, in a process of trying to figure out what type of certification to get, truly the highest form of a global certification as it relates to material health and overall environmental health. In addition to that, our paint is naturally anti-mold and antifungal because it is porous in nature. And so mold is a really big conversation around interior wellness. It can cause a lot of people a lot of sickness. A lot of people are very sensitive to it. And a lot of time, the reason why mold forms inside of a home is because you have a plastic layer of paint on top of an underlying substrate like plastic. There's moisture in the air. That moisture gets trapped, and that's how mold forms. And it can cause terrible effects to both your health and built environment. So we're really hitting that wellness component from a bunch of different areas. And we really think that we've created a best in class wall covering that applies similarly to acrylic latex paint and lasts a lot longer.
Okay, so there's a few things in there that I want to talk about. The first of all, on your website, there's a line that says "Paint your walls with rock instead of plastic." I think I heard the answer as to what that means. We're talking about a mineral-based paint. How do you eliminate VOCs though? So I look at the the petroleum-based products, either the latex or the acrylic, and something has to evaporate in order for the paint to get hard and remain on the surface. What's your magic formula for doing that without filling the air with an evaporating petrochemical like an acetone or some sort of, similar volatile material?
Well, the thing about VOCs is really interesting in that a lot of chemicals that impact human health are actually that are included in a lot of zero VOC paints or low VOC paints are actually not considered VOCs. So fungicides, biocides, preservatives, apes, PFA, not considered VOCs. VOCs sort of became the topic of conversation when we transitioned from like oil-based paints to water-based paints because oil-based paints were highly flammable. And a lot of US-based certifications talk a lot about like GreenWise and GreenGuard. They talk about VOCs, but that really has to do with its impact to the ozone layer and less to really do with the impact on human health. To your point, Joe, anything that evaporates off of the surface is considered a VOC. So technically, water is considered a VOC. So no paint is 100% zero VOC. I believe the EPA standard, and this is evaluated by the state of California, is like anything less than 10 grams per liter is considered zero VOC. Anything less than 50 grams per liter is considered low VOC. So our paint does have water in it, so it does evaporate off of the surface, but that is the only quote unquote chemical H2O that is released from the paint that's considered a quote unquote VOC. And where we're fundamentally different is really more in the formula, in that it doesn't have these things like biocides, fungicides, PFAs, all of these things that are not considered VOCs that are used in conventional paints won't be found in Alkemis paint. And that is like one of the hardest things to help people understand, is because they just see like, oh, zero VOC, like that means that the paint is clean, but it's really not.
Our paint has less than 1 gram per liter. So we're like zero VOC to the nth degree. And another thing we like to point out is, in contrast to, conventional paints, which can off gas for up to 10 years, Our paint has virtually no odor and it has no off gassing now or ever, and actually absorbs carbon dioxide as it's drying. So it cleans the air instead of polluting the air.
Yeah, it's brilliant. So I'm a chemical engineer by background, and I've
Mhm.
actually worked very briefly in the paint industry, believe it or not. And recently, listen to this one now. I recently had an engineer tell me that they didn't want to bring natural light into a space because they were afraid that the natural light would result in further off gassing of the materials that they used in the interior space. Yeah, which is just absolutely bananas. Like, we've put some poison in the building, so you can't let the sun in because the sun might release the poison. And he was dead serious.
Wow.
He was not kidding. This is where things are. So yeah, well, throw that on your marketing page because
Yes.
that attitude is out there for sure, and I
Yeah.
found it absolutely bizarre. Anyway, let's go back to the chemical engineering side of my life
Mhm.
because I've got I've been working in plastics for a really long time. I worked in acrylics for a while, and that's what got me into the world of skylights and bringing natural light into spaces, and that just led me into this world of daylighting. Anyway, when I was in university, which is a long time ago, there was a lot of talk at the time about the coming plastics crisis, right? We were just starting to realize just how much the sheer mass of plastic waste that we were starting to amass. Like, and anybody who knows anything about the technology of plastics knows that we're not going to recycle our way out of it. It's not an option. So, but we buried it for a long time because for 20 or 30 years, basically China took all of the plastic. Don't know what they did with it, but a few years ago, about 4 or 5 years ago, they stopped taking it all. And now it's something that everybody's going to have to reconcile fairly soon. So, yeah, I can see non essential single use plastics starting to become very much the boogeyman in the very
Mhm.
near future. Like, plastics are going to be a really dirty word very soon. Let's talk about microplastics. You guys talk about that a whole lot. Can you define microplastics and tell us why they're such a problem?
Sure, I'll take that and then pass it on to Maya. So,
Mhm.
microplastics technically are defined by plastics that are less than 5 millimeters in length. So, I guess so anything about the size of a pencil eraser and under are technically considered microplastics.
Okay.
And these come from like a variety of sources. I mean, all types of plastic debris that degrades into smaller and smaller pieces, or that, anything that breaks down, right? All of these plastic polymers are going to break down. I mean, in some capacity at some point. So they slough off and, they turn into microbeads or, tiny pieces of, manufactured, you're a plastics expert. So all across the board, all types of plastic, but everything from, like we said, architectural paints to health and beauty products, even toothpastes contain microplastics. And so all these tiny particles, they pass through water filtration systems, in our civic and municipal water filtration systems, and they end up in the ocean and all of our waterways. And so that's where it gets really problematic is that these forever chemicals, they are threatening our aquatic life, everything, every living thing in the ocean, including humans, are being affected, and we're drinking this stuff. So I'll pass it on to Maya to talk about, the effects that these chemicals have been found to have, on babies being born with microplastics in their systems, as well as all the correlation to all of the, deleterious and detrimental health problems in humans that are being caused by microplastics.
I mean, it's a really big issue. Just to throw some numbers out there, Forbes did an article in 2022 indicating that architectural coating paint makes up the largest percentage of microplastics in the ocean by 58%. So this is not like, and we were shocked by that. We didn't even know that. I mean, again, Alchemist was really a function of coming up with a solution to surround our 5 surfaces inside of our home with something that isn't microplastics, considering the fact that we're being exposed to them constantly. But the fact that they are such an environmental issue was really shocking and a surprise to us to find out. And then, furthermore, to Price's point, we partner very closely with the Parsons Healthy Materials Lab. They have created an incredible free resource and database, to help educate designers, architects, and young students who are becoming designers, because this is becoming such a big problem, talking about the built environment and how to create better alternatives, because 37% of our overall carbon footprint actually comes from development of our built environment globally. And so talking about microplastics from a human perspective, which is like, really scary, we're being bombarded by these in so many different ways. And, these impact our endocrine disruptive systems first and foremost. Like whenever we talk to doctors, and we've had really productive conversations with functional medicine doctors, they immediately get what it is that we're doing, because fertility, women related issues as it relates to hormones, men's fertility, like all of these things are being affected by the impact of our environments, whether we're breathing these things into Price's point. Paint can off gas for up to 10 years, you know, utilize having them on our body in all these different types of form, ingesting them through waterways and a variety of different types of things. So like, you do not want to be inhaling these things constantly inside of your house. And certainly for people with young children, I mean, like, new mothers, this is a really profound conversation that we're having. There's a reason why pregnant women are not supposed to paint nurseries, because of their exposure to these chemicals, which are in large part PFAs, because they can impact the, unborn fetus. And then furthermore, Parsons Healthy Materials Lab has some really insane and disturbing facts about how babies today are born with 257 microplastics, like on average. Paint has been found inside of our blood. So, I mean, these things are like a really big deal, and they're very subtle. But when we think about like such higher cancer rates, respiratory issues for young people, we have to look at our environment and not just the food that we're eating. And I think that's really what's becoming part of the conversation. The New York Times just did a really interesting article on this as well, how we're just getting hit from all different angles with various forms of microplastics.
Even
Yeah.
in the clothing that we wear, actually, that's like another thing. And how, like if a woman is breastfeeding a baby, how the, whatever clothing she's wearing, those microplastics, like, are being ingested by the child. I mean, and then our skin is absorbing them. So like really being hit from every angle.
Yeah, so the polymer-based clothing is abrading constantly, and you're getting yeah, it's an interesting challenge for sure. So are they finding, are there any particular diseases that there's a very strong correlation between levels of microplastics in the body and particular diseases? You mentioned cancer, like are they being looked at as being potential carcinogens? Are there other ailments that are tied to microplastics?
I mean, I'll jump in quickly because I've had many conversations with my incredible naturopathic physician, who is the founder and co-director of a very respectable clinic in Santa Monica, and she specializes in women's health. And she has, continually observed the detrimental impact. It's a lot of endocrine disruption, which of course, leads to complications in menstrual cycles, reproductive health, and goes infertility. So those, the volatile organic compounds, the phthalates, the PFAs, it's really been interesting to have that kind of two-way conversation, because like she's been sending me medical journals and saying like, well, yes, I've been, giving lectures on this topic recently. So again, it's really across the board. Cancer, I mean, I think, there are other correlations between, children with learning disabilities and all these chemicals. But yeah, the endocrine disruption seems to be the biggest thing, as well as, respiratory issues from anybody who's sensitive. And obviously there's a lot of focus on the prevalence of asthma as well. So how much these chemicals are affecting, children developing asthma as well.
And then
Gotcha.
there's a really large population of people that are, is new to us, but multiple chemical sensitivity, like MCS, is something that people reach out to us that have, it's like they don't necessarily know that this is something that they are experiencing until they start to notice that they can't go anywhere, they can't stay in hotels. Like there are people that are looking for Airbnbs that are specifically for people with multiple chemical sensitivity. There are communities being built consciously to help rectify these issues, because I think the more and more we get exposed to all of these environmental chemicals, it's like hard to pinpoint exactly what it is, but it's definitely the built environment that is impacting these people's ability just to like live inside of their homes. And so that is like a really big community for us, as well as, as I mentioned previously, I think anybody who's experienced mold and mold poison, like if you have that one time and it impacts your family, like now all of a sudden you're going to become an expert in how to renovate your home in a way that's anti-mold, antifungal. And as I mentioned, like the way that conventional paints will tackle this is they will actually put fungicides and biocides directly into the plastic. And if you look on the safety data sheets, it will say that this is a known carcinogen because, California requires you to put a Prop 65 warning. So while we don't know exactly like what type of cancer it can cause, the point is that these chemicals are known to cause cancer. And it literally says that on many safety data sheets if you inquire and look. So
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I wanted to see where the research is now. All right, I'm going to change gears completely just for a
yeah,
minute. We're going to
of
talk
course.
about we're going to talk about longevity. Okay, there's a lot of stuff I want to make sure we cover today. Okay, so architects and designers today are very concerned about lifespan of products, right? They're if something's got a short lifespan, they move away for a number of reasons, and not the least of which is embodied energy, right? Like every time you have to replace something, there's more embodied carbon that's been utilized and released. How do alchemist paints compare in terms of lifespan relative to the traditional plastic based paints?
I'm happy to take that one. Not surprisingly, rock lasts a lot longer than plastic. A lot of these materials that we are using, as I mentioned, are the same materials that were used in the Blombos caves and Renaissance paintings. And we can obviously see like their longevity, but quite literally, our paint is guaranteed to perform double the amount of time as an acrylic latex based paint. So we guarantee 20 plus years of satisfactory performance. The average, conventional paint guarantees about 10. And not to mention, it probably can go longer than that. We know about these ancient frescoes and different types of stone based wall coverings that have lasted hundreds of years. But what is also really incredible about this paint is it basically creates an insoluble bond with the underlying substrate. So it almost like fuses with the wall. Therefore, you'll never have any blistering, peeling. Water can never get trapped behind it. Obviously, a lot of these things are unsightly, and we know that like over time, these things can happen. So, and because of the mineral pigmentation, it's made out of rock. So these colors never ever fade in the sun. They also have a really beautiful light reflective quality. So, and our paint is cradle to cradle certified, as I've already mentioned. So it's considered a low embodied carbon product. We use a lot of renewable energy when we do produce the product. And therefore, for anybody who's interested in LEED certification or WELL for commercial builders, our paint is automatically contributory towards air quality points. It's just really a great long lasting building material.
Also like to add, it's like Maya said, it's non-film forming, it won't ever peel, and just other performance benefits. It's completely non-flammable. We have the highest class A ASTM fire rating, and that's a huge thing for durability and long-term performance, particularly in commercial buildings. And it's super, again, class 1 abrasion and scrub resistant, so best in class from that perspective. And the hiding, the coverage, and the fact that it's self-priming also saves a lot of time and money for architects, designers, contractors, So the product ultimately is like a lot more economical in the long run. We always like to tell people, buy better, buy less. You have longer renovation intervals and longer term savings and minimum maintenance costs due to the long lasting functionality and appearance, over the duration of the product's lifespan.
So that means there is a price premium, but there's an ROI on the price premium because of longevity. Is that a valid statement? Okay.
Absolutely.
I
Okay.
mean, I guess it depends on what you consider price premium, but when you look at like, the higher ends of the paint market, like a Faro and Ball or fine paints of Europe, we're definitely priced below that. We retail for $120 a gallon, but we have, obviously economies of scale depending on how much you're purchasing. But to Price's point, just to give you an example, there's many different ways where you're ultimately saving money. Like there are so many cases of people having to renovate due to mold inside of the home. As I already mentioned, the best way to prevent this is to start by utilizing a paint like Alkemis Paint, which is naturally anti-mold and anti-fungi resistant. In addition to that, we did an install here in New York City where somebody had an entire living room painted in Faro and Ball black. Their contractor had come in and told them that in order for them to go from black to white, they were going to have to use 2 coats of primer and at least 3 or 4 coats of paint. They were able to utilize our paint, no primer, 2 coats of white, did the entire apartment. And so arguably they saved a ton of money that way, as well as time on labor because they didn't need to have somebody come and, be there multiple times doing all of these various coats.
Okay. Now, we should do this before we move on. Just in case there's anybody out there who doesn't know what cradle to cradle certification is, can you just briefly tell me what it means and what it entails and what the advantages are, or what it tells the consumer or the commercial developer that you have that certification?
So, Cradle to Cradle certified is the world's most stringent and actionable environmental certification. So, it's global as opposed to domestic. And a lot of people rely on, Green Guard, GreenWise, Declare, which again, those are a great start. We commend anybody who's making an effort to get any type of, environmental certification. But just for reference, the Cradle to Cradle banned chemical list is 10,000 chemicals long and the red list is 5,000 chemicals long. So it really leaves all these other certifications in the dust. And we truly believe, this is how consumers develop trust is by understanding that, your products have been evaluated by a third party that's recognized and, respected for, creating these certifications. And that, the other thing that we always like to bring up is that, the cradle to cradle certification, it actually, a lot of these other certifications, they just take into account one measure of sustainability, and cradle to cradle assesses the product across 5 different levels of sustainability and manufacturing and emissions, and just like a very holistic approach towards creating these standards for really to create products for a better tomorrow.
Right. So you took it from the earth. It was fine in the earth before you took it,
Mhm.
and when it goes back, it's going to be fine for the earth again. Is probably a pretty decent way of describing cradle to cradle. Yes.
Fantastic.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. A very quick question for you. Is there any sort of special equipment or training required for painters to apply Alchemist coatings?
No, it applies like normal paint. I mean, we do recommend that you mix it really well. It's a little bit heavier than your traditional acrylic latex based paints just because it's made out of minerals. And, I will say that like there's different sort of applications that you can get. If you're looking for something more textured, you can roll the first layer and then you can utilize a block brush on top, which will give you something in between like a flat matte finish and a lime wash. But it's simple, easy to apply. DIYers can do it, contractors can do it. You just need to make sure that you're keeping a wet edge. The paint dries fairly quickly. And it really creates, I mean, like I know we talked about this. There's like this misconception that if it's green, it's not going to be as beautiful. But we've worked with, Design Miami. We were their preferred paint partner last year. We work with some of the most esteemed design galleries across the country. We work with some of the most esteemed art fairs across the country. Our paint happens to be, because of its no off-gassing for fine arts and antiquities, it happens to be best in class. We also work with institutions across the country. So it's a really beautiful, high quality finish, and it's really easy to apply.
I'd
Okay.
like to say, yeah, just to add to that. So it actually can be rolled, brushed, or sprayed. That's a question we get a lot, from contractors. So all those application methods are suitable.
Oh, well, that leads nicely into my next question, really, and it was with regards to the artist's palette, the designer's palette. Are you adding colors, textures, reflectivity? The ability to do things that either they have always had or would like to have. Is there anything on the artistic side that are you opening doors artistically that were closed in the past?
I mean, I think so because I don't, on a number of levels, but we're really approaching this industry from a different perspective, because of our involvement and our passion for, art and design. But it was the most fun I've ever had was creating our initial core palette and, just really thinking about, I feel like I could have gone on forever, but editing is always the key element to creating something that's really approachable, right? The magic is in the editing. So yeah, I had a really great time doing that. And we love doing collaborations. As Maya mentioned, we've collaborated with Design Miami, we've collaborated with many design galleries. We've collaborated with artists on developing specific color palettes for their installations and exhibitions, which we absolutely adore doing this kind of thing. And just really getting into the conceptual side of it and thinking about what is the feeling that you want to communicate when somebody walks into this space. And this one incredible artist came to us and said, she was like, I want the space to feel like you're in ancient Rome and the midday sun is reflecting off all of the, archaeological ruins. I'm like, okay, great. Like that's such a specific vision. And so we were able to create this really beautiful yellow that was a gradient, from floor to ceiling. So yes, we love doing collaborations with artists and designers. That's something that gets us really excited.
And custom color, ideation. I mean, I always like to say, inside of the home, people want something that's clean, modern, and aspirational. I mean, these are pieces of like the design and artistic journey that are important that people want inside of their home. And when you think about the competitive landscape, you certainly have the brands that you think of as like aspirational, and you have a couple that you think of that are modern. But we really think we sit in the middle of this Venn diagram of really being a best in quality product that gives all aspects of that inside of your house.
Wonderful. Okay. Price mentioned sun when she was speaking there just a minute ago. So, being a sunlight daylight guy, I'm going to jump on that for
Yeah.
just a second. How does your paint stand up to UV? Like UV can do some real serious damage to sort of I'll say traditional or legacy pigmentation. What about your product? How does it do with regards to having lots of sunlight on it?
The
It's
paint will,
totally UV stable because
yeah, it
it's made
will.
out of rocks. It will never fade. And initially, when we were developing the product, we did, 3.5 years of R&D, and I can pass it off to Maya to talk more about that. We were talking about using, we were analyzing and researching all the different types of pigment, historically and, currently that have been used to color things. So we were looking at a lot of, dyes that were used have been used for, say, textile dyeing, right? And these things are beautiful and they're incredible, indigos and, cochineal, which comes from an insect, and, plants and flowers. But ultimately, at the end of the day, when you combine these in a binder and apply them to a wall, they're not light fast. They like spirulina algae has an incredible color. Well, guess what? When you put it on the wall and it's exposed to UV, it fades super quickly. So we very early on shifted to mineral technology because rocks and these particular, earthen pigments that people have been using since the dawn of time, they don't fade. Like Maya referenced cave paintings, from 25,000 years ago. those are still vibrant and strong. And, frescoes and, paintings, the color is intact and, vivid as it ever was.
Okay.
And not to mention the clear crystal quartz binder also has this really unique light reflective quality. Sometimes, especially for people that are really in the weeds on color, when we're talking about whites, if they're in a very daylit space, they'll notice that they can see like the subtle undertones of like the greens or the yellows in certain whites that we have or other colors, because basically you have what is considered typical in a conventional paint is you have a milky plastic binder, you use synthetic pigments. There's not a ton of dynamic change in the color when you're utilizing daylight or if you're using artificial lighting, but these paints have a natural pigment that are enshrouded in a hexagonal quartz. And so it's almost like they're enshrouded in glass, and the way that they reflect off of the light is really beautiful. It adds a lot of depth to this space, and there's a lot of really beautiful things you can do with that. So
Yeah, and from a daylighting perspective, it would keep more of the light in the visible light spectrum before converting it to infrared. So has a has a
Absolutely.
nice little advantage there too. All right, I'm
Mhm.
sure there are architects and designers listening to who will be listening to this and will be asking the question, "How do I get this?" So, what's your distribution model? How do people find Alchemist Paint?
You just go online and you just pick out your color. We have an incredible trade program for architects, designers, artists, anybody that's looking to buy paint on a regular basis. You can sign up. You'll get 15% off, a free fan deck, some free samples, curated custom customer service. So that's a great way to get engaged with us. But if you're just a normal consumer, if you just want to try out a couple of quartz or just some 8x11 samples, you just go online and you can make purchases fairly easy. And then we do have, a couple of design stores that we work with across the country that you can go in and ask more specifically about details about the paint. If you want to talk to somebody, we have a couple of great brand ambassadors as well across the country and decorative painters that we work with, depending on how technical you want to get into a conversation. But it's really easy.
And what's the URL, Maya?
www.alkemis, ALKEMIS, paint, PAINT.com.
Alchemistpaint.com. Perfect.
Yeah.
All right. So there's a question I ask every single guest before I let them go. And you guys we'll get two answers today. I always ask the guests to answer from whatever perspective they'd like, from their own perspective or whatever perspective they'd like. So let's start with Price. Just because on my screen you're on the left. What what makes a great building, Price?
Oh, it's such a good question. I mean, I think I always talk about great design being something that makes you feel complete and zen and whole. And like in concert with nature and with, those architectural and design decisions. So I always joke, I'm like, so if you go into a building where someone is really educated in design and architecture, they'll be able to point out like, oh, look, this building is sited this way. So the sunlight can come in, or this particular angle does this, or, these materials make you feel a certain way. But conversely, like somebody can come into that building who doesn't have a design education and just say like, this space makes me feel really good because like everything is in its right place. So I just think, yeah, good design is harmonious. And yeah,
Yeah.
so that's my answer.
Oh, I love it. I love it. Okay, Maya, your turn.
Oh, well, that was a really great answer. I'd have to agree. I think good design starts and ends with how you feel inside of the space. And I know that can be really subjective for everybody. For me, that means, I tend to really lean towards modern buildings and modern interiors, like really beautiful light exposure, really big open spaces, high ceilings, a space that just feels beautiful and unique and, makes me feel happy on the inside. I would agree. Harmonious is definitely the way to go. And I'm very interested, obviously, in, the continued development of biophilic design and how to bring the outside in, because I think just naturally we as humans are interested in being a part of nature as much as we can, even if we're in urban spaces. So
Absolutely. Okay, look, before we go, is there anything you guys would like to announce? Do you have any big news or anything that you really want to emphasize? Here's a chance to do some shameless promotion. So please promote away or share away.
Well, we will be collaborating with Design Miami again this year. So if anybody is headed down to Art Basel Design Miami in December, please come by and see us, or feel free to reach out. We would love to set up a meeting with you. We're going to be doing a beautiful custom palette for them in line with their curatorial theme. We do really beautiful custom color ideation. So even if for some reason our palette is very complete, Price did an incredible job, but if there are colors that you're looking for and you don't find, or you're interested in doing a custom color match, those are all things that are available. We also have lime wash available bespoke to the trade. And I would expect that you would continue to see interesting technologies as it relates to wall coverings coming from us in the future, as well as collaborations with some of our favorite designers on how to talk about neuroaesthetics, not just from the material, but the color inside of the space and how it makes you feel.
Oh, very exciting. Very exciting. Look, thank you so much. This was a wonderful conversation. I'm so glad I got to speak to you guys. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank
Thank
you,
you so much,
Joe.
Joe. We're super grateful. This was really lovely.
Yeah, it was a pleasure. You guys take care.
You too.
Thanks.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Better Buildings for Humans. For more information on the world's best light diffusing and highly insulating glass glazing, please visit advancedglazings.com.